Well, at AfricaCom this year, the topic of 5G has come up time and time again. Is it time for Africa to invest in 5G? Can we afford to be left behind? Those are some of the questions that have been asked and deliberated over in the 5G track. And the man looking after that track is Matthew Reid, who is the practice leader, MEA at Ovum. Lovely to have you back at AfricaCom TV.
It's a pleasure to be here, Africa. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Well, what have you heard from the various panels? Is it time for Africa to really start focusing and rolling out 5G?
Well, I think, to be frank, 5G is going to come to Africa a little bit later than most other world regions. And that's just due to the market dynamics. Number of factors at play here. I mean, one is the 5G devices are very expensive. The stage at which the African mobile market is that currently it's dominated by 3G for mobile broadband. Even 4G has still got quite a lot of growth left in it, and even 3G is still growing in Africa, which is different from the global trend whereby 3G is already declining. Also, it's going to, at present, we don't really have the really compelling business and use cases for 5G that make it immediately essential for Africa. The first use case that has already begun to arise on the continent, but will be the first use case for 5G, we expect, is for fixed wireless access.
Yeah.
And we've already seen, for example, one operator, Rain, here launched that here in South Africa. Nevertheless, I think it's 5G is coming to Africa, albeit perhaps a slightly later date than some other world regions. And as it is coming, the continent does need to prepare. So both the industry, the operators and so on, need to get their technology roadmaps in order. Regulators and so on need to plan for releasing the spectrum for 5G and other mobile broadband technologies. So even if it might be a little way off, it's coming, and Africa does need to prepare now.
And are you seeing that, by the way? Are you seeing it from the telcos, from the mobile network operators, from government even, that yes, while we are going to be a little bit delayed in rolling out the infrastructure and the technology of 5G, at least let's get the basics and the foundations right so that when we do, it's a lot more efficient and easier to do so?
Yes, I mean that is we are seeing that, and I mean of course it does vary across. Africa is a huge and diverse continent, so the pace of development does vary across it. So the big operators in South Africa, here in South Africa, obviously MTN and Vodacom, are actually very keen to launch. Now really if they can, but they're held up by specific factors to do with the spectrum not being available yet. More widely across the continent, yes, I mean operators and regulators I think are aware that they need to start planning, and we're seeing some signs of them doing that.
You made mention of regulatory frameworks, for example, in the release of spectra by government. I imagine that is not the only obstacle towards connectivity on the African continent. Geography becomes a huge issue.
Yeah.
What are some of the other factors that you see as being challenges that we'll need to overcome in order to ensure connectivity on the continent?
Yeah. There are quite a few still. I mean, devices, one of the things I mentioned earlier, I was thinking of 5G devices at that point, but just generally, for people on low incomes, smartphones are still very expensive. So I think that's one important aspect, to bring data services to a broader data access to a broader audience. We need more affordable data devices, and there's been some efforts to address that. For example, we've seen MTN and Orange bring out what they're calling smart feature phones, or smeature phones, which are a sort of cross between your basic kind of feature phone with some smartphone devices and at a lower lower price point. So devices is one factor. The broader kind of telecoms infrastructure is another. So about 10 years ago, well, up till about 10 years ago, there was a big issue about the lack of submarine connectivity, submarine cable connectivity between Africa and the rest of the world. I mean, fortunately, that's largely been addressed. There's a lot of cables put down, but there are still bottlenecks in terrestrial cabling. And again, of course, Africa is just such a huge place as well. So it's a difficult task to basically put down all that sort of. Although of course, we talk about Africa as a mobile continent, but behind that mobile and wireless infrastructure, there does need to be some sort of fibre infrastructure to carry the information. So yeah, there's a range of issues still to be addressed to improve connectivity on the continent.
And of course, I mean, it's obvious to state it. Understandably, there are pockets of concentration of people in the urban areas dotted all over across the African continent, but there's still a significant population that is living in rural and wholly underserved parts of the continent.
Yeah. Exactly, yes. I mean, a lot more needs to be done to bring connectivity to rural and other underserved areas, which, I mean, and they can be underserved areas in urban areas as well. So, I mean, for example, earlier this week there was an interesting piece of news with Google launching its Wi-Fi service, the Google station in the Cape Flats, just very near, obviously, to where we are right now. So, I mean, there are some initiatives underway, but yeah, definitely more to be done. And actually, one other one I'd like to highlight is affordability and cost. The UN Broadband Commission recently publishes an annual report about the state of broadband worldwide, and it highlighted that for Africa, the cost of data is basically very high compared to income. So it had the UN Broadband Commission has what it calls affordability benchmark, whereby 1 GB of data should only cost 2% of monthly income, average monthly income, or less. But the average for Africa was 8%. So four times that affordability benchmark. So of course that's making data access very very difficult, unaffordable for a lot of people.
Quite a bit of work to be done then. 3G is still growing in Africa. 4G still needs to be probably rolled out fully, if you like, before we even start entertaining and enjoying the benefits and fruits of 5G. But it's good to know that governments and the players in the market are getting ready for it. Matthew Reid, thank you very much for joining us today. Matthew Reid, of course, from Ovum.